A billionaire rips a $100 bill and throws it at the feet of a missionary who was asking for donations to help the needy. "This is what I think of your blessings and your God," he said with disdain. To him, God was nothing more than a creation to comfort the weak. Faith, a crutch for those who lacked the competence to achieve what they wanted in life. What he didn't know was that his son was about to go through something that would change his life forever, and he would suffer the terrible consequences of mocking the one who could have helped him. It was another Sunday in Boston, and as usual, the faithful gathered for the morning service at First Baptist Church. Across the tree-lined avenue, Nathaniel Sharman observed the scene through the windows of his penthouse on the 30th floor of Beacon Tower, the most exclusive building in the city. His blue-gray eyes followed the movement with contempt as he sipped his imported Colombian coffee. At 58, Nathaniel Sharman embodied the American dream in its most ruthless form. As the founder and CEO of Sharman Technologies, a cybersecurity giant, he had built a billion-dollar empire from almost nothing. Coming from a middle-class family in Chicago, Nathaniel had always shown a fierce ambition and a brilliant mind for business. By the age of 23, he had graduated with honors from Yale and developed his first security software. By 35, his company was already among the most promising in the industry. Today, Sharman Technologies protected the data of the world's largest corporations and several government agencies. "Fools," he muttered, watching a young family enter the church, wasting time on comforting fantasies. With a precise movement, he adjusted his silk tie while checking the platinum watch on his wrist. Even on Sundays, Nathaniel was impeccably dressed and ready for a video conference with investors. To him, every day was an opportunity to expand his empire. The only true company in his life was his 19-year-old son, Connor. The young man, a freshman at Yale, was home for the weekend, something that was happening less and less frequently. Their relationship, once close, had gradually deteriorated since Elizabeth's death 7 years ago. Elizabeth Sharman had been the perfect counterbalance to Nathaniel's pragmatic and sometimes ruthless nature. A university professor of English literature when they met, she had an artistic sensitivity and emotional depth that had fascinated Nathaniel from their first encounter at a charity event in New York. During their 16 years of marriage, Elizabeth had been not just a devoted wife but a moral anchor, keeping Nathaniel connected to values beyond material success. The diagnosis came when Connor was just 9 years old, advanced pancreatic cancer, already metastatic. The next 3 years became a brutal roller coaster of momentary hopes followed by devastating disappointments. Nathaniel mobilized every resource that his money and influence could provide: international specialists, experimental treatments, exclusive clinics in Switzerland and Germany. The bitter irony was that while he was building a fortune developing systems to protect information, he found himself completely powerless to protect the person he loved most. It was during those years of struggle that Elizabeth's faith, once a discrete part of her life, became her main source of strength. As her body weakened, her spiritual conviction only grew stronger. She began attending prayer groups, voraciously reading religious texts, and having long conversations with the hospital chaplain. To Nathaniel's despair, Elizabeth seemed to find a peace that he, with all his resources, could not provide. "How can you believe in a God that allows this?" he asked one night, after yet another devastating round of tests showing the relentless advance of the disease. Elizabeth, by then considerably thinner, the shine of her brown hair replaced by the paleness of chemotherapy, held his hand with surprising strength. "I don't believe in a God who causes suffering, Nat. I believe in one who gives me the strength to endure it with dignity." In Nathaniel's memory, that response only intensified his frustration. For a man accustomed to controlling all variables, accepting only measurable results, the idea of finding value in suffering seemed like an unacceptable surrender. Elizabeth's death, when it finally came, was not sudden but a gradual surrender, like a tide slowly receding. In her final days, she gathered the strength for meaningful conversations with those she loved. For Connor, she left letters, one For each birthday until he turned 21. For her closest friends, small keepsakes with personal significance. And for Nathaniel, a request he had yet to fulfill. "Promise me you'll take care not just of Connor's body and mind, but also his spirit, Nat," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but her eyes still luminous with that conviction he never fully understood. There's more to life than what we can see and touch. After the funeral, a beautiful ceremony where hundreds shared stories of how Elizabeth had touched their lives, Nathaniel buried himself even deeper in his work. The pain of loss was channeled into an even fiercer ambition, as if every new contract, every acquisition, every revolutionary product his company launched was an attempt to build an impenetrable fortress against the vulnerability that Elizabeth's death had exposed. Connor, just 12 years old, was left to navigate his grief largely on his own. Of course, Nathaniel hired the best therapists and ensured his son attended the finest preparatory schools. Materially, the boy lacked nothing, but the emotional absence of his father created a void that, over the years, was filled with increasing rebellion and, more recently, behaviors that Nathaniel preferred not to scrutinize too closely. "Money won't bring your mother back," Nathaniel would often tell Connor in the rare moments they discussed the subject. "But it keeps us safe from everything else we could lose." The phrase was repeated like a mantra, a justification for the endless hours dedicated to work, for the emotional absence, for the obsession with security and control. What Nathaniel actively suppressed was how Elizabeth's faith had not wavered during her battle with cancer. Even when the best specialists declared her case terminal, even when the pain became almost unbearable, she maintained her trust in a divine plan that Nathaniel saw as, at best, a comforting illusion. Her death not only deepened the void that Nathaniel filled with achievements, but also solidified his belief that any higher power, if it existed, was unworthy of worship. What kind of deity would allow a woman like Elizabeth to suffer that way? What kind of loving God would take a mother from her child? Her faith hadn't saved her. The best doctors that money could buy hadn't either. The only difference in Nathaniel's mind was that he wasn't deluded about the universe's indifferent nature. On a Tuesday like any other, Nathaniel walked briskly down Washington Street on his way to a business lunch when he was approached by a middle-aged man wearing a simple blue shirt with a small embroidered crucifix on the pocket. "Good morning, sir. My name is Michael Stewart. We're raising funds to renovate our church's shelter for the homeless. Any contribution would be a blessing." Nathaniel stopped, looking Michael up and down with a smile that never reached his eyes. "A blessing? For whom, exactly?" "For those in need, sir, and for you as well. As we say in church, giving is receiving." Nathaniel's smile turned into a cold laugh. "Let me explain something, Michael. I make more money in an hour than you probably see in a month. And do you know why? Because I don't waste my time on fantasies about some imaginary being in the sky rewarding me for throwing money away." Michael didn't flinch at the hostility. "I understand your position, sir, but God cares for all of us, even those who think they don't need him." Something about that calm response infuriated Nathaniel even more. "I don't need your God. I have everything I need right here." He tapped the Italian leather briefcase he was carrying. "When your God can buy an apartment in Beacon Hill or pay for an Ivy League education, maybe I'll start paying attention." Then, in a deliberate gesture meant to humiliate, Nathaniel pulled out his wallet, took out a $100 bill, and tore it in half, right in front of Michael. "This is what I think of your blessings." He tossed the pieces on the ground and walked away, leaving the man standing there on the sidewalk. "I will pray for you and your family, sir," were the last words he heard Michael say. The months that followed brought subtle but disturbing changes to Nathaniel's carefully controlled life. Connor, who had always been a quiet and studious teenager, began showing signs of rebellion that Nathaniel couldn't understand. His first semester grades at the university plummeted. There were calls about missed classes. When Connor came home for winter break, Nathaniel barely recognized his son. Too thin, with deep dark circles under his eyes and a constant nervousness. "It's just stress from studying, Dad," Connor insisted whenever questioned. But the signs were there. Valuables starting to disappear from the house. Connor sneaking out in the middle of the night and returning only the next morning, if he returned at all. One night in January, after discovering that his Patek Philippe watch, a gift from Elizabeth, was missing, Nathaniel confronted Connor. The argument that followed revealed the terrible truth. His son had developed a drug addiction that had started as just fun at fraternity parties and had spiraled into something far more serious. "You don't understand the pressure, Dad," Connor shouted. "Everyone expects me to be like you, but I can't. I don't want this life you planned for me." "I built all of this for you," Nathaniel shot back, his voice shaking with anger and fear. "And you're throwing it all away. You built it for yourself," Connor snapped. "Ever since Mom died, all that matters is your damn empire. She would have hated what you've become." The words hit Nathaniel like a physical blow. Before he could respond, Connor grabbed his backpack and slammed the door on his way out. It was the last time Nathaniel saw his son for almost 8 months. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Nathaniel mobilized every resource money could buy. Private investigators, rewards, contacts, and law enforcement. But Connor had simply vanished into the streets of Boston. Occasionally, leads would surface. Someone matching his description spotted in a neighborhood known for drug activity, a young man using his credit card before abandoning it, but all of them led to dead ends. As time passed, Nathaniel's carefully built facade began to crumble. He lost weight. His work performance suffered. For the first time, money proved powerless against what truly mattered. Night after night, he lay awake in his luxurious empty penthouse, staring out at the city below, wondering if his son was even still alive. On a particularly dark night, 6 months after Connor's disappearance, Nathaniel found himself doing something he never imagined. In the early hours of the morning, he walked to the First Baptist Church, the same one he used to watch with such disdain. The church was closed, of course, but Nathaniel sat on the steps at the entrance, his head in his hands. "If you're there," he whispered into the night air, "show me. Not for me, for Connor." There was no dramatic response, no divine sign, only the distant wail of a siren and the crisp September wind. Nathaniel walked back home feeling foolish, yet strangely relieved to have spoken the words out loud. 2 weeks later, on an ordinary Wednesday, his phone rang at 3 in the afternoon. An unfamiliar voice introduced herself as Director Sarah Johnson from the New Dawn Recovery Center. "Mr. Sharman, I believe we've found your son." Nathaniel nearly dropped the phone. "Connor? He's alive." "Yes, sir. He's been with us for about a month. He was found in concerning condition, suffering from malnutrition and other health issues. When he arrived, he couldn't, or wouldn't identify himself. Only yesterday did he regain enough clarity to give us his name." Within an hour, Nathaniel was at the address provided, a modest building in the southern part of the city, one he likely never would have noticed under normal circumstances. At the reception desk, a discreet sign read, "New Dawn Recovery Center, a ministry of First Baptist Church of Boston." Sarah Johnson, a middle-aged African-American woman with a kind but resolute expression, led him down clean but simple hallways. "Your son came to us through our street outreach program. He was in critical condition, Mr. Sharman. If our volunteers hadn't found him that night, I'm not sure he would have survived." Nathaniel could barely process the information as they walked. How is he now?" "On the road to recovery. Physically, he's improving every day. Emotionally, there's still a long journey ahead. Addiction is a complex illness, Mr. Sharman." Finally, they reached a small communal room where a few young people were playing cards or reading in silence. And there was Connor, thinner than Nathaniel remembered, his hair longer but with eyes that were clear for the first time in a long while. "Dad?" Connor's voice wavered slightly at the sight of Nathaniel. The embrace that followed was awkward. Both, out of practice with physical displays of affection, but genuine in its intensity. Nathaniel felt tears he hadn't even realized he was holding back. "I thought I had lost you," he murmured against his son's shoulder. "For a while you did," Connor admitted honestly. "I lost myself too." When they finally pulled apart, Connor gestured toward a man approaching them, middle-aged, wearing a simple blue shirt with a small crucifix on the pocket. Nathaniel felt his stomach drop in recognition. "Dad, this is Michael. He runs the outreach program here. He's the one who found me that night, and the night I didn't think I would make it." Michael Stewart extended his hand without hesitation, showing no sign that he remembered the humiliating encounter from months earlier. "It's a pleasure to officially meet you, Mr. Sharman. Your son is a remarkable young man." Nathaniel took the handshake, unable to find the right words. Connor continued, unaware of the history between the two men. "Michael has been incredible, Dad. He always says that God meets us where we are, not where we think we should be. I know you don't believe in these things, but it made sense to me when I was at my lowest." Later, as Connor left to do his daily tasks at the center, Nathaniel found himself alone with Michael in the small chapel. "Did you know who he was when you found him?" Nathaniel finally asked. Michael shook his head. He had no identification. When he arrived, he was delirious, calling out for his mother. "We only found out he was your son yesterday." Nathaniel ran a hand through his graying hair. I don't know how to thank you or how to apologize for our last encounter." "There's no need to apologize. We're all on different journeys, Mr. Sharman." "Nathaniel, please." Michael nodded. "Nathaniel, then, you know when you tore that bill that day, I prayed for you." "Why?" "I was cruel. Because I saw pain behind the anger. And because that's what we do here. We believe that everyone deserves grace, especially those who think they don't." Nathaniel looked around the small chapel, simple, without the ornate stained glass windows or polished wooden pews he would have expected. Just a quiet space with a few folding chairs and a wooden cross on the wall. How do you help so many people with so few resources?" Michael smiled. "We do what we can with what we have, and we believe it's multiplied in ways we can't fully explain." That night, as Nathaniel drove back to his empty penthouse, Connor would be staying at the center for at least a few more weeks to complete the program. He stopped at a red light, at the exact spot where he had torn the $100 bill. So many months ago, something had changed within him. Not a dramatic conversion or a sudden spiritual epiphany, but the beginning of a different understanding. In the weeks that followed, Nathaniel became a regular visitor at the New Dawn Recovery Center, at first, just to see Connor, but gradually for other reasons as well. He observed the tireless work of the volunteers, the genuine care they offered to people society preferred to ignore. He began asking questions, not to challenge, but to understand. When Connor finally returned home, 3 months after they had been reunited, the dynamic between father and son had fundamentally changed. They talked now, really talked, about Connor's hopes, his fears, and yes, his newfound faith. "I'm not saying you have to believe like I do, Dad," Connor explained one evening as they shared a simple dinner, something they had rarely done before. "I'm just saying I found something that helps me make sense of the world, and of my own failures." Nathaniel nodded slowly. "I respect that, and I respect what Michael and that center did for you. For us." A week later, Nathaniel scheduled a meeting with Michael at the center. He arrived carrying a leather briefcase just like in their first encounter, but this time, his purpose was entirely different. "I'd like to make a donation," he announced, placing a check on the table between them. It was a substantial amount, enough to renovate the entire center and expand its programs. Michael looked at the check, then at Nathaniel, surprised. "This is incredibly generous." "It's just money," Nathaniel replied with a small smile. "I've recently learned that there are things far more valuable." As he prepared to leave, Nathaniel hesitated at the door. "Michael, I don't know if I believe in your God the way you do. Maybe I never will, but I believe in the work you do here. And I believe that, well, maybe there's more to this world than I used to admit." Michael smiled. That's a good start, Nathaniel. A very good start. The following spring, First Baptist Church inaugurated an expanded wing of the New Dawn Recovery Center. Among the speakers at the ceremony was Connor Sharman, celebrating 1 year of sobriety, and his father, Nathaniel, who did not describe himself as a man of faith, but as a man who had learned about humility, grace, and the unexpected value of a helping hand when it was needed most. And if the church regulars noticed Nathaniel occasionally sitting in the back row during Sunday services, listening intently without joining in the hymns or prayers, they respected his journey. After all, as Michael often liked to say, God meets us where we are, not where we think we should be.